Welcome to the Abel Speaks podcast, where we speak to commonly asked questions by parents who have received a life-limiting diagnosis for their child. We're Daniel and Kelly Crawford, and we're glad that you've joined us. Okay, welcome to the Abel Speaks podcast. This is going to be a unique episode. If you've been tuning in with us previous, or if you're brand new, this podcast really exists as an archive of commonly asked questions where we are speaking to parents who have chosen to carry a child with a life-limiting diagnosis and navigating what that journey looks like. A part of that journey oftentimes is encountering the decision around what is often presented from, at least up to this point, in our nation's recent history, from a medical provider as considering terminating or aborting the pregnancy after you have received a diagnosis of this sort for your child that indicates that your time with them might be short. And so that's what we really exist to do, and what this podcast exists, and who we're talking to. And yet in this current cultural moment where after nearly 5 decades, the federal law of the land was such that abortion, has been framed as a freedom, a women's right to choose. And specifically, if you're a person of faith and you're thinking, okay, how do I think through this conversation? The culture and the conversations that I'm seeing online, the voices are so loud and coming from both directions. What should I think? And so I'll try and simplify all that with just the question of, okay, Roe versus Wade has just been overturned. Now what? And so we're joined again by our friend Todd Wagner, pastor for 22 years at Watermark Church, and somebody who has just led extraordinarily well in helping Christians process this conversation around abortion and being pro-life, and what does that even mean? And being pro-choice, and what does that even mean? And so to the people out there that are now wondering, hey, what is my next step of faithfulness? Okay, now there's this legal decision that's come down. What does that mean, and what does that not mean? And as a person who seeks to walk with and honor the Lord, how should I be feeling about it right now? So there's a nice, simple question for you, Todd.
So first of all, let's just talk about what happens when Roe v. Wade is overturned. Is it doesn't make abortion illegal. What it does is it throws it back to where it should have been in the very first place. In 1973, what happened was almost the injustice was that through an activist judiciary, they made a decision that states could not make laws, that legislators who hadn't made laws related to this issue could not make laws as to whether or not abortion was going to be something that our society allowed, encouraged, and facilitated. And so what's happening with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which needed to be overturned because it was bad law, it was bad legal precedent. We have separation of powers in our country for a reason. And the legislative branch is made to legislate. And they are the ones who create law. Now, it's the job of justices to determine whether or not the laws that were made are consistent with our Constitution, which talks about giving people certain inalienable rights. And so now we get to the question is, does a woman have a right to choose? All right? And should our legislators, whether our states or local or our federal government, make decisions about a woman's right to choose? And I would just say, well, choose what? What clothes she wears? Who she marries? All right? What her favorite movie or band is? Well, absolutely. Does a woman have a right to choose to terminate the life of another person? I don't think so. Okay? Her body, her choice. That's right. But we have to understand that child inside of the woman is not her body. It is not a cyst. It's not a clump of her cells. It's a separate individual with unique DNA that child is dependent upon that mother for life, but so is a 2-month-old dependent upon that mother or that father for life. So all Roe v. Wade is doing is pushing this back to legislators that will then make a decision as to whether or not they want to facilitate the right for women to terminate life, or men to terminate life by paying for an abortion to happen to a woman. Let me just say this. Roe v. Wade being overturned is simply justices with, I think, integrity looking at our Constitution and just saying this should never have been something that we decided. Okay. And then secondly, to people that would just say, well, should we really decide that? I would say, absolutely. Every law is a moral decision. People go, well, should we legislate morality? The answer is, that's what a law is. It's a judgment on what is right and what is wrong. And so the question isn't, should we legislate morality? The question is, whose morality are we going to legislate? So I just would say this is not a nuanced conversation. This is not like, I don't really know. I don't want to impose my values on other people. Really? Are you against rape? Are you against pedophilia? Are you willing to impose your values that you live in a society that doesn't allow for rape? I mean, let's just go right down the list. Think about your words and think about what's going on. You want to impose your ideas about slavery and racial injustice on people? Because you're going to know about the character of a nation based on its laws. And I want to tell you, one of the things that's happened as you watch this initial leak of the decision that was made, and then, ultimately the way people are responding to the decision becoming more public, you see that that people are arguing for a right to abortion. And when you listen to how they talk about it, I mean, I've seen the most horrible things saying, like, yeah, tear them apart. Who cares? Destroy your baby. Rip that little, thing out of and throw it away. And while that doesn't represent everybody who is quote unquote pro-choice, it ultimately is expressing the reality of what we're doing.
Which has been prettied up with Kelly, you can speak to that, of just how masterful it feels like the issue, which is where I want to lead you next, is just, hey, like help us sift through the semantics. And would you want to speak to for a second just the language and the softening?
Yeah,
and
I think
the deceit?
I think that the language, I mean, I don't even like to use pro-choice and pro-life, but I would say the language that the pro-choice side has used, the narrative that they have written, was masterfully done, right? Because it has desensitized us to what is actually happening and what's not happening, and desensitized us to, our offspring, which is like mind-blowing, that we as humans, what you were talking about on a previous episode, but the fact that a mother can view their offspring as an evil thing that is worth getting rid of is outside of how God created us, to love our children. There's something innate in us as parents that makes us want to move towards our children, not to move away from them. And so I think just the power of our words has been used well, unfortunately.
You're right, Kelly. So many people go, really? I thought it was a blob of cells. Even if you go back and look at the original majority decision written by Blackman in 1973, when he talks about what happens, is he said, hey, during the first trimester, and science was what it was in 1973, it was a made up, really, differentiation, right? That Henry Blackman looked at this thing and just said, hey, the first trimester, which we know that babies are in utero 9 months and they're not, it's really 10 months, because we don't know for the first month that we're even pregnant. All right. And now we see that there's a heartbeat of 8 to 10 weeks and feeling comes almost immediately. And so, but he was making the case that during the first, trimester, yeah, no problem. Okay. Second trimester, hey, maybe states can some make laws. And then certainly in the third, he created the idea that maybe you need to really be careful that third trimester. But that's just you need to know it was a human all along. It wasn't like it all of a sudden became human. The second that zygote exists, that, blastocyst exists, that fetus exists, that embryo exists, those are all just different stages of human development. I mean, blastocyst, embryo, teenager, toddler, young adult, those are all different descriptors of the same thing, a human being. Okay. And so you got to ask yourself, is it ever okay to terminate the life of a human being? And then some people go, well, yeah, but that poor mom, she doesn't want to be a mom. Well, okay. So does that mean when she's having a tough time with the terrible twos, she can off that child? I mean, we think that's ridiculous, right? But if we're going to apply logical consistency, and all I would just say to my friends that are listening out there is we need to apply logical consistency to some of our decisions. And just like it's wrong to only care about children in the womb, and then just letting them suffer when they're out, in their abject poverty or with disinterested parents. No, we need to care about those children as well. And so, first of all, Roe v. Wade doesn't say it's illegal to have an abortion. Right? It was amazing to me. Bill Maher, who's a rather well-known contemporary pundit, at least had the integrity to come out not long after that initial opinion in its draft form was released. He said, listen, I had no idea that America has some of the least restrictive abortion laws in the world, because I thought we were this oppressive nation. All of Europe has more restrictive abortion laws than we do. We talk about how progressive Europe is. It turns out really what is true is America is more barbaric. And he goes, China, North Korea, America.
Those are the top three.
Those are the top three.
That's
in
not
terms
good company.
of just saying that you can do whatever you want to do with these children in the womb. Secondly, he was surprised to find out that more women were against the idea of legalized abortion than men. He goes, I thought it was men who didn't want this to happen, but he had never even really looked. But it doesn't matter if it's men or women who are against it. If it's wrong, it's wrong. It's not wrong because women are against it. Okay, it's wrong because it's wrong.
Yeah. And I think the reason as a ministry we wanted to address this is just because in all things, I've stated this on other podcasts, but our heart really is to educate and equip people so they can make the best right decision. And so we often find, whether it's a family that we're serving or just people in the community that we're talking about this topic with, most people don't understand what the procedure of abortion is. They don't understand the science behind when life begins. And so for us, our heart is just to hopefully pose some thoughts that make you go, maybe I will go and do a little more research to educate myself on what is and isn't happening, so I can form a more educated decision. And then I think also from just a biblical perspective as believers, what would you say to people who maybe feel like, hey, this feels just like a complicated, nuanced situation, and so I just don't feel comfortable addressing it or speaking to it, even though I might speak on all the other political, social issues that have been going on in our day, but this one I'm going to choose not to be willing to enter into dialogue about.
Yeah. I would ask what they mean by complicated. Okay. Does that mean that you might say something that's going to make people lash out at you? All that's required, Edmund Burke said, for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. And one of the ways to not have a problem with evil is to go along with evil. But I'm going to tell you, evil is going to complicate your life. And so sometimes when people say, well, it's complicated, yeah, we can talk about all the unique issues that are out there. Like, what about, abortion and the instances of rape? Okay. One of the ways to deal with a wrong is not to do wrong to somebody else. But let's throw out even the 1% of pregnancies that we're talking about when you talk about incest and rape. Okay. And let's just deal with the other 99% just for a second. And by the way, I'm not surrendering that 1% ground, but what I would just say, it's complicated when you start to stand for something that a world that has either not thought all the way through it, or the world that is just flat out in rebellion to what's best. Okay. Because listen, the South during the slave trade was pretty committed to doing what they wanted to do. And it was complicated to speak up for the rights of slaves in the 1800s. It was complicated to speak up for the rights of blacks in the 1960s. But I want to tell you something. It was the right thing to do. And you ought to go ahead and complicate your life if you're an individual, especially with any conviction, okay? Because that's your privilege, that's your job, and it's going to be sometimes expensive, but it's going to be something that when you look back on, you're going to find out that if we don't do what we're supposed to do, it's even more expensive for our society. So yeah, I would tell you, go ahead and complicate your life. It's really, if you look at it, it's not as hard as you think. What's hard is that truth sounds like hate to those who hate the truth. And the truth is that's human life. Human life is worth protecting. And you want to be that individual that was willing to, in a compassionate way, maintain clarity and conviction when everybody else is abandoning that
element of like the nuance or the complication. The life-limiting diagnosis is one of those scenarios that's thrown in there. Rape, incest, life-limiting diagnosis. And so I think people feel like we can't say, hey, no, abortion is wrong, and simultaneously acknowledge the issues within our society of like, hey, yeah, single moms do need more support, or a family who receives a life-limiting diagnosis does need more support, or maybe more people in our country should be open to foster care or adoption. Like there are real systemic issues that are happening that we can acknowledge while still saying, but that doesn't make abortion okay. And I think that people really struggle with that. As a ministry, what we've seen is that support really does change stories. And so in whether you're talking about the 1% or you're talking about the 99 that are in maybe a difficult situation or a season where they weren't expecting to be pregnant, what we always encourage all people, but specifically believers, is just like, hey, what are you doing to engage in the conversation to be a part of the solution? Because we can point out the problem all day long, but that still doesn't mean that abortion is right just because there are problems with the system that we are operating within. And so we just encourage people, whether that's supporting and investing in a ministry like Abel Speaks, or a million other opportunities out there, whether that's foster care, adoption, or a myriad of other options, to really engage in being a part of the solution and not only talking about the problems and the issues that you're seeing.
Hey friends, thanks for listening in. We hope this content has been helpful. At Abel Speaks, we exist to support families who have chosen to carry a child with a life-limiting diagnosis, and we want you to know that the foundation of that support is rooted in relationships. And so if you're a parent in this circumstance, then by all means continue listening in, but we'd really encourage you to reach out by sending an email to support@abelspeaks.org. Again, our heartfelt prayer is that this episode has served you in some way and that we might have the opportunity to serve you further in the future. The Abel Speaks podcast is produced, mixed, and edited by the team at Sound of a Rose.